Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is LaShondra Vernon, and I am one of the founding members of Bronzeville Week. And today we are going to have a conversation about the history and the impact of the United States Census. Um, I am joined by some wonderful friends and colleagues. Congresswoman Gwen Moore is with us, Dr. Kowalik, our health commissioner, and the visionary behind Bronzeville Week, Alderwoman Malele A. Coggs, are with us today. For the sake of time, I am going to run through the content of the history of the census rather quickly to provide context for the conversation, but also so that those on the panel have things to react to, and to talk about going forward concerning the census. So first of all, my passion project is called Prime Solutions, a system design firm dedicated to advancing innovation by analyzing the interest of the public and building beloved community. I love transforming conflict. I love looking at ways that we can avoid unnecessary violence through understanding conflict. And I love living through art. And so these are things that I'm passionate about, and Prime Solutions is a reflection of those passions. I started on this project on the history of the census working with Shantae Nelson and Marquesa from, at the time, Wisconsin Voices. Shantae Nelson is now with a census organization that leads in some of this work. But we have worked very closely together on issues concerning the census, concerning social justice. And so that is the beginning of where we started this conversation. We decided to go pull the information and find out for ourselves what the US Census has done over the years. So this will be a quick run through of that. So it began the presidential year of Washington in 1790. And the 1790 census was done by marshals for the US Judicial District under an act with minor modifications for census taking through 1840. Please forgive my beloved dog. The enumeration process called for some very specific things to request. The original census was all free white males over 16, white males under 16, white females, and other free persons is the way that we classified in the census. So in 1810, the questionnaire brought up the acknowledgement of free slaves, for free Blacks, but at that time, we still were not fully capturing what people in the United States were identifying as people of color. We did identify Indians, slaves, and free Blacks within this process, and the term colored showed up in 1820. The end of slavery brought about what we would have expected, a change to the way we are counted. There were some impacts, but of course, as we all know, in some places in the country, people were not successfully alerted that they were free. So because the enumeration process was in the hands of US Marshals collecting, there's a great chance that a lot of people were not counted through that process. In 1870, we added Asian to the population, and enumerators were instructed to write Black, white, mulatto, quadroon, octoroon. All of these were added to the collection process. Really important because this was the first time that Black showed up. This will mean something a little bit later in the process. In the 1900s, colors and race questions were removed mulatto. And so we've had some conversations amongst our communities about what mulatto means to people and how the impact of use of that word was derogatory. the Indian population schedule came about. This was in order to get a better understanding of indigenous populations in the United States. Now, at this point, we are still not talking about people opting or selecting anything. We're still talking about enumerators coming out and making an estimate on what they see. So this is a significant change in what it means to be white that occurred in 1940 under President Franklin's leadership, promoted through the Good Neighbor policy. In 35, the federal judge ruled that Mexican immigrants were ineligible for citizenship because they were not white. And so as a way to build peace, whiteness was extended to Hispanics from Mexico. As you can imagine, this created some challenging dynamics between people who did not identify as white, but were Hispanic. And there were quite a few political discussions with LULAC and figuring out the discrimination of asserting whiteness or not asserting whiteness became a part of the debate. So we traded Black for Negro in 1950. And so we got into a space where we were using that language. Now, fast forward to today, the use of the word Negro is frowned upon, but it is definitely something that showed up in the census in the 50s. So in the 60s, we started self-identifying, which is good, because then people could articulate for themselves how they identify. The census takers were able to choose from different categories. And in the 70s, most Americans were able to fill out their own forms. And starting in 2000, people could choose more than one race, which was really important because people did identify across spectrums and were unable to be counted that way. And my favorite part, the 70s, that's when I was born, so that's when life got real. In 1970, we returned to Black from Negro, which is quite significant because we've had a lot of challenges around what Black folks call themselves. I deeply identify as Black, and I think everyone has the right to choose their identity. But, you know, given that I was born in the 70s and I'm a Generation Xer, I deeply identify with Blackness. So modern expansions, the list of categories have expanded. In the 80s, that was a time period when that occurred. In 2000, respondents could pick more than one race, as I mentioned before, so that's really a positive step forward. And really making these changes around what Black people identified as, unfortunately, did not have a whole lot of Black people involved in that discussion until, I would say, maybe the 70s. And I think that, you know, there may be some times that may not have shown up in history as much as they should have. But being able to identify is something that Black people are able to freely do in the 90s to 2000s, which is really exciting. And so that being said, I'm going to move into the current state of why the census, why now, why does this matter? So every year on the 10s, 10, 20, 30, 40, we do the census, which is immediately followed by reassessing resources, reassessing populations, and those things happen so that we can make sure that the resources get where they belong. In America, the United States amount that they received is in the 800 billions. Wisconsin is 12.6 that they received. I believe this was for 2010 time period. And so there's a lot of resources that are impacted by what happens in the census, and a lot more than people are aware of, which is why the panelists will be really important to this conversation. And so let's get into the discussion. So I shared all of that context because I think it's important to know where we've been. I think it's important to know where we are at a point in time. And I think it's important for us to know where we can go for the future. And so I have a lovely, esteemed panel of amazing Black women who I am going to now open the floor to have this conversation about the impact of the census. And so I'm going to ask every person on to answer the question, how does the census impact your daily work?
I guess I'll start. This is Alderwoman Cox. The allocation of resources from the federal government that the city has to deal with is largely based on the data that's collected through the census. So it affects it that way. Additionally, the way that wards are broken up and districts are broken up to elect each of the 15 council members and the mayor, as well as all the city level elected officials, the city attorney, city treasurer, comptroller, all of that are based upon the census data. You know, 15 council members, each one of us represents roughly 40,000 people. But to know how many people live is based on census tracts per ward and per district. It's based on all the data that's collected from the census. So pretty much from us getting elected and how the geography of the area that we represent is selected from the allocation of resources to the way that a lot of programs and different things are done at the city level. We are constantly looking at the census data to help drive the intentionality of much of the work. So the census is critically important, you know, for the money to be counted and for us to be able to be very intentional about the work that we're doing.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman. From the public health perspective, census data is extremely important because, one, as noted, it impacts funding. So there's a great deal of federal money that comes to our state that comes down to the local level that's based off of the numbers. So like we have a maternal and child health block grant that is annual as far as the plans for that, and there's different focal points for that. Like for instance, health equity is now a state priority, so we're able to use some of that funding locally. But then away from the funding side is like, how do we monitor disease and disparities and things like that? So we tend to look at census tracts as a way to kind of zoom in areas that need additional support and resources. And also that there's some cornerstones of public health that are tied to census. For instance, vital statistics, which is an essential function of public health departments across the country. So it's essentially your birth, death, and marriage licenses or certificates. And that also kind of provides data between the 10-year marks for a census. And then also there's these healthy people objectives and goals from our federal government that kind of lay out how funding will be organized, as well as what our goals are, what are we trying to do specific to various health issues. For instance, diabetes is one, violence prevention. So they're very specific to health topics, but when you like connect the dots between these healthy people, which is like, so we're going into healthy people 2030 right now, we would be looking at how does that impact various communities of color, especially our community, the Black community.
Thank you, LaShandra, for such a wonderful presentation. I think this really gives us some substantive information to have this conversation. Let me say that I agree with the previous speakers. Certainly, the largest subdivision of the census is on the congressional level. There are 435 members of Congress. They literally do the census, divide that number up by 435, and that determines how many members of Congress each state will receive. I was elected after the census was taken in 2000, and we actually lost a seat here in the state of Wisconsin because of the shrinking of our population. I also want to lift up some of the things that Dr. Kowalik and Alderwoman Cox have talked about with regard to the funding. You know, the funding ranges from everything from public health to allocations for schools, allocations of formulas for transportation, everything that we rely on for sustenance in our community. You know, there are some very controversial things that have come down the pike with regard to how we count people. As you know, we just recently rebuffed the question as to whether or not you were legal or illegal with regard to counting the census. The census says we should count each and every person because whether you answer, if you live there, whether you're undocumented or not, whether you're a prisoner who's returning after a prison sentence, you are still using the streets, using the resources of that geographic area. So there are very controversial things about the census, like counting prisoners, like up north here in Wisconsin instead of at home in Milwaukee where they are apt to return. So I agree with everything everyone else has said, and I certainly have a lot to share with regard to how the census personally affected this seat that I am holding now. That's called the 4th Congressional District of Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And I'm so grateful to all of you for making time to be here and to be involved in this conversation. So a couple more points to elevate and maybe for you to react to as well. So I just want to hold space for the very beginning of this was about how we were counted, and it was 16 years old or older, or a white man, a white woman, or a slave. So people who look like me started out being a count of property and not a count of humanity, right? So the systemic racism that is rooted in America is something that I want to hold space for and to call out specifically in this space, knowing that we're still fighting that to this day. And then the impact of engaging in the census disproportionately impacts marginalized populations, BIPOC folks. And so I think, you know, from my perspective, I think it's very important to uphold the fact that, you know, a lot of resources that are not long enough are because of a lack of participation. So anyone who wants to say something specific about that, what are some of the blind spots that we leave open when the public does not participate in the census?
I can understand an apprehension in the community for not wanting to take part in the census because it's a government function. And as a public health official, you know, we also experience that too, where there's some skepticism, like, well, why are you asking that? Or what do you want to know all of that for? And that information possibly being used against our community. So, you know, I think as long as we can continue to share information about what the census is about, how this is being used to bring money back into our community, and really like using the key opinion leaders and other folks in our community that can vouch for, yeah, this is going to bring money back to us, I think is in our best interest. But we also need to hold us accountable, hold government accountable to make sure that we are using the data with good intention and not using it in a malicious way. For instance, when I started teaching college and started learning more about how there was all of these efforts to like add different people of color to white, you know, why was there this initiative to pad the white category versus other groups, or creating separate groups for other people of color, and even the whole like ethnicity versus race aspect of all of this, where it seems like there's always this effort or attempt to support anti-Blackness in anything government related. So for us being involved in different levels of government, we have to continue fighting that, because if we don't take an active stance against that, then we can't trust that that is going to happen in a way that's fair and that's trying to do so with good intentions.
Certainly, Lysandra, I'm really glad that you're using Bronzeville Week to really do this teaching. Because I think that that's what it really comes down to. We're going to have to educate people about the census in the same way we've had to educate them about the history of the right to vote and the sacrifice that people have made and the lives that have been lost, and opportunities that have been lost. People have to be told about our having been counted as 3/5 of a human being, for the purposes of some sense of equity, in terms of the South making sure that they got their monies. But we were 3/5 of a human being. I think people need to know that for many years in the South, they simply didn't do redistricting as required by the Constitution in order to prevent the enfranchisement of Black people. And people need to understand that, getting that money from all of our collective taxpayers is an entitlement of citizenship, no matter who they are, what color they are, and that this is what they're losing. And yes, there's systemic racism involved. I mean, when I way back in the day, Polly Williams and I sued then David Obey and Jim Sensenbrenner, the two congressmen, for the map that they drew after the 2000 census, and when we had lost a seat in the state of Wisconsin. We lost a seat in the state of Wisconsin. We had Tom Barrett representing sort of the north side of Milwaukee, and Jerry Kletchker representing the south side of Milwaukee. But when we lost the seat, they combined the seat. But in order to make up for the numbers, they lopped on the southern end, the northern end of Kletchker's district in West Dallas. And, and of course, they cut off Shorewood, Whitefish Bay, Brown Deer, Glendale, those suburbs where Black people were migrating. And not only were Black people migrating to those northern suburbs, but there was a greater community of interest because of a variety of things. The Chapter 220 program and other sorts of supports. And so I had no intention of ever running for Congress, but Polly Williams, who certainly knew her way to the courthouse, showed me the way to the courthouse, and I sued them over this map, which favored, because the Democrats on the southern end were Reagan Democrats, and there were more Republicans. And of course, 2 years later, Jerry Kletchker elected not to run. And I ran for the seat, even though I didn't believe in the construction of the seat. And the rest is history. But still, it was not constructive for a Black person to win. And so I've been very grateful. And since then, of course, people in Cudahy and St. Francis have gotten to know me a little bit better. But it was not constructed in that way. Now, since then, we have reapportioned again, and I have gotten constituencies on the northern end of the district, Shorewood, Whitefish Bay, Fox Point, and it's a lot more solidly Democratic than it was prior to the district that I first won in. It's a much more solidly Democratic district. And so there's a way, that was a way in which the district was a Democratic district, but it did not favor a Black person to win.
I really love the lessons that we're learning here this morning. I remember when all that was going on, so it's so great to hear the Congresswoman speak on it and share that education with some others. Anytime you give personal information to folks, there is some level of risk and an understandable trepidation for people, whether it's to the government, to a company, to some online source or whatever. And I don't ever want people to feel like they shouldn't have some level of trepidation when they sharing personal familial information. But I think after you do your research and hopefully hearing some of this information here today helps some people do their research who might not be as familiar with the census, you kind of have to pick and choose your risk and reward for choosing to share information. In the case of the census, I think there is greater risk with not filling out the census. There is a risk of your city not getting the level of resources that it needs to help improve your quality of life and the quality of life of your neighbors. There is risk of people from your community, from your ethnic group, and all of that not being able to access the varieties of resources to the level and degree that it needs to if the real count is not had, if they really don't know how many people are there or the demographics of who those people are. So I think it's totally natural for people to have a little trepidation, but I think that in the end, for representation's sake, for resource allocation's sake, and for the potential of improved quality of life, it is a greater risk to not fill out the census. So it is something that I think everyone should do because it's needed, and Lord knows we need resources to help to make a lot of the things that we are fighting for every day happen.
Thank you, everyone. Alderwoman, I really love it. Is too much of a risk to not participate as a very important takeaway of the impact of the census today, regardless of its origins. And we are at 2020. So what does that mean? That means we're about to do this again. We're about to redistrict again. We're about to reassess the populations. We're going to do this again. And in 2010, I participated in the City Hall effort to engage the community in maps, right? So under Ashanti Hamilton's leadership, myself and several other leaders of Milwaukee got together with teens, and we gave teens access to mapping tools at City Hall in 301, and they were able to come there and write their own maps, present them to the Common Council to recommend their versions of what they think their boundaries should be for their city. And I hope we keep that up because we didn't get exactly what we asked for with the last maps. There was a bit of a battle around the Supreme Court. The maps that did come out deeply impacted the next round of elections. And that is what we should expect. But Congresswoman Moore hit the nail on the head. It was not as bad as when she had to go sue. So we're making ground. We just can't give up any turf. I think that's the way that we have to manage the narrative around that. So just some quick housekeeping. So we're a little further along in the census process. Some of you may have received something in the mail. It usually comes to head of household folks, but census questionnaires are out. They will be sending enumerators out. Let me look at the timeline that's on here. I think the enumerators might actually be starting to dispatch now, if not in the next few weeks. If any of you know better than I the date, because I thought I had it on here, but maybe I don't. But soon, because I think at the end of May is when people were able to start engaging in the process themselves. So you will start seeing enumerators in your neighborhoods and your communities if you have not completed the generic mailing that comes to you. When you receive the mailing, it will have a unique ID for your address. So if you can potentially fill out the one that's been sent to you already, please do. Or you can go to the website. If you don't have that unique ID, you can participate on the website as well. That is available to you now. And I think more than anything, we all just have to remember that if we don't engage in the process, then we will be on the menu instead of at the table. And I say this all the time. It's one of my favorite sentences right now, and I think it'll always be. I feel sad for people who say they don't do politics because politics is doing you every day. And so I think we all have to start getting into the space where we engage in all the things that are political because they're intentionally disenfranchising us and removing us from the conversation just out of frustration. So that is the end of our discussion. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions. You all were so thorough that no one asked any questions on Facebook. Look at that. So I have no additional questions for all of you, but I know time is precious right now for each of you. For me as well, I have a dog who clearly I need to tend to in this house. But is there anything in closing that you would like to say to make sure that people are energized around not just the census, but engaging in the process, voting, and also maybe even considering that maybe this is their time to run for office or be appointed to a position of leadership?
Well, I just say dare to be counted, dare to stand up. It's, as we see in these very troubling times, it is so easy to become invisible. I have taken the calls from people who didn't get the first economic impact payment or the first unemployment insurance payment, much less the second one that may or may not come. And I mean, democracy really works when people participate. We've seen it from the protests around George Floyd. And we need to turn that same energy into, what do you say, political power. And it starts out with the power to be counted. If they didn't want us to vote, we knew that was something precious. And now they don't want us to be counted. So it's something that just makes you go, huh? It makes you scratch your head. I am very distressed that the president is talking about cutting the census off earlier when we've had fewer responses than we've ever had. It's really easy. They can't use it for immigration purposes, and your information will be private for 100 years. So thank you very, very much for this chance to weigh in.
What, you want me to go? All right. Thank you, Congresswoman Moore, for your dedication and service. And of course, it's always a pleasure to hear you discuss some of the history and things that you've had to overcome to continue to be in a space of leadership, and also helping the rest of us move into various spaces of leadership through our different sectors and disciplines. So, and then of course, even having Brownsville Week, considering the circumstances that we're in a pandemic, and using technology to still make an impact and get the message out. So shout out to Alderwoman Coggs for her vision, and LaShondra Vernon, and everyone else that's been working on this. I know that there's a lot to offer, and I hope that everyone is looking for additional ways to get plugged in and participate. So including some very civic opportunities, some civic engagement opportunities, talking about the census, talking about voting. We have an election next Tuesday. Every election counts, so making sure you're involved. The health department's been very involved with the election commission to make sure that it's a safe, fair election. There still will be some in-person voting, but we have been encouraging more people to mail in ballots, to do absentee ballots for the COVID response. I just got mine yesterday, so I got to get mine done. But nonetheless, being actively engaged, I know it can be really overwhelming to think about running for office, but you have people here that are mentors that can walk you through the process. You don't have to start out big. You can start out at the local level, you can start at the state level, or if you want to go federal level, just start researching various positions that might appeal to you and start looking at who's in those roles, kind of following them, their positions, things like that. Policy and politics, as LaShondra said, is like, you don't have to acknowledge the validity of it for it to be real. It's very real. I mean, life and death decisions are made due to policy and politics. So being informed, getting firsthand information, I had heard, or looking at some memes on Facebook, like really reading bills, reading what's going on firsthand is really important. So I just want you all to be encouraged. We are in a very interesting time of our history in this country, and I think we're at a turning point. I think we can actually make some things happen in a short amount of time, considering all of the awareness where we're at right now as Black people. So thank you all.
Alderwoman, I'm not sure, did you speak already? Go ahead, Alderwoman. And I see you, sister.
I do think those who, one, everybody should, do the census. I think it's a necessary piece to have the resources that we need to improve our quality of life. I understand people's resistance to government, especially with all that's going on in the world right now. But I challenge folks to think of their ability to be change agents in the system. We all know that the political system is flawed, but it's a system that has been around and will be around. So the question becomes, do you ignore its existence or do you work to change it? And there are different pathways to work to change it. And one of those could be you helping to change it from the inside. I see, myself as one of those people. I don't agree with everything that government does, but I work every day to try to put forth policy and advocate for folks in my community in such a way that I am not beholden to the system. I am beholden to the people. So the way things have always been done sometimes needs to change. And to have a seat at the table to help usher in that change is something we all must do, or those of us who are willing to need to step up to do. I know that you had titled this about Black women at the table, so I'm going to take the moment to say this as well. If you study politics, you will know that it is true now and has always been that we as Black women have a huge opportunity to influence politics. So I think for a lot of those young women who are out here trying to be activists and all of that, I think I would encourage them to study these political officers. Take the issues you are passionate about and see who makes policy to affect them, change them, improve them, and begin to look at if running is something that you want to do. And LaShondra, you know from all the trainings we've been to that they say mostly women are reluctant to run. Like for a woman to run, you have to be several times, whereas men kind of self-appoint. So I hope for all the women watching that you take this moment as the ask. Don't wait for a million other people to come to you and tell you that, hey, the great work you do, you could probably be a such and such. No, take this as the ask now. Don't wait, because definitely we're needed. We're needed at the table so that we can usher in the change necessary to help improve our community. And the other thing about politics is everything is everything. We began this conversation about the census, but as you can see, we've talked about social injustice, we've talked about politics and running for office and everything else, because it's all relative. It all impacts our lives in so many different ways. And if you're one who's tired of sitting on the sidelines, watching stuff happen to us, and you really want to get in the fight to help change stuff for us, for the future, definitely running for office is one of those things that can help to do that. Thank you.
So I just want to echo that you've been asked twice because I'm reaffirming Alderwoman Cogs's very important words, especially for Black women. So I want to be explicit about that. Black women are often making a lot of the influential conversations, decisions, and processes happen, but aren't always holding the title that reflects their power and what they bring to the table. And so I urge any women that are watching this, any young women that are watching this, any young Black women that are watching this, that you consider that your ability to argue and clap between your words is actually a superpower that you need to take to a hill, whether it is the city, the state, or the nation, because right now we need people clapping between their words on all those levels. My sister Izzy just joined. Ismira H is the legislative support staff for Congresswoman Moore, but she is more than that to me. She is my sister. And Ismira is also one of the co-founders of Bronzeville Week, I am assuming, sis, you are in DC. Am I correct? My sister Izzy is in DC. She is one of my favorite human beings. And I'm very, very happy to see her face because this panel, this discussion reflected different types of women in leadership that are Black. Dr. Kowalik, put some respect on her name, that's a doctor. She is appointed Alderwoman, are you Esquire, what is it, attorney, councilwoman? Malele Coggs is elected. Ismira is also leading in government, but in a role that is impacting Black women all over the world. And then there's little old me, just angry and always clapping my hands between my words, but then also really just holding space for the next generation of leaders. I really believe in us. And I believe that there are many activists right now that might still be marching that need to evolve to become an organizer and then evolve to become a strategist and take on one of the roles that one day each one of us will be ready to transition from. And so I say that even though this was not only for women, I almost always unapologetically lift and elevate Black women because erasure is real. And I am grateful for each one of you. Ismira, do you want to say any words? You see the presentation, you just came because you wanted to see our faces and we wanted to see your face too.
No, I don't necessarily need to speak. It's just great to see the Bronzeville tradition continuing. I'm happy this census portion of it came together due to the urgency. I just want to make sure though, because I joined late, the Congresswoman did mention the mass incarceration impact and how Black Milwaukee, okay, she did talk about that, okay.
Very briefly, she did bring it up, but I think it would be good for you to revisit the point. She did bring up that they were counted in the places where they were incarcerated, but not where they would come home. So maybe a little bit more of a dive.
Okay, well, I wasn't prepared to speak, but I'll underscore that point just because how important it is for Milwaukee in particular, given how hyper-segregated Wisconsin is of a state. It's so critical for neighborhoods like Bronzeville and other neighborhoods throughout Black Milwaukee to really offset this siphoning impact that the census counting has, in that the mass incarceration impact, it really, as it plucks our Black people out of our neighborhoods and sets them in far-flung places deliberately all over the country, desolate, remote, predominantly white areas, we have, I think, a double duty to really offset that, counterweigh that by participating, just so we can increase the already lacking representation and resources that the census would provide us. So the Congresswoman, she has legislation along with Hakeem Jeffries out of New York to reverse that trend. So people who are in the mass incarceration or in the prison industrial complex would really be counted in the communities they were plucked from, where they were extracted, and not where they're being warehoused without any proper representation or interaction from their members of Congress, who I'll say particularly in the House of Representatives, they have no contact with. So, I mean, that's something that was very heartbreaking when I used to work in the Congresswoman's district office, is we would get so many letters and pleas for help from Black men being mistreated. And I mean, rural Oregon, rural all over, they lived their whole lives in Milwaukee. They know no other zip code. So they contact the Congresswoman in desperation for, alleviation of their abhorrent conditions. And we have to say, sorry, your congressperson is some, hyper conservative white man whose name you'll never know, whose face you'll never see. So she, along with Hakeem Jeffries, working on legislation to reverse that. So I just wanted, I don't know if she highlighted that at all, but that's important to know, that we have a larger imperative to participate in spite of all of that resistance. that's historically justified. But as as Alderwoman Cox said, my Nubian sister, there's more there's more working for us to participate than against us. So I'll just highlight that. Yeah, and also, you know, being a staffer is also very pivotal and impactful. You don't necessarily have to be in the leading role. I'm definitely not used to being outside from behind the curtain, but there are ways to make very heavy but quiet change. I mean, my specialization is international affairs, and some of the things we are able to wield around the world, especially for people of African descent, it's done because we do it quietly behind the scenes. So don't discount the importance of staffer positions, supporting roles as well. And that's it. Nice to see y'all.
This was so well-rounded. I feel really proud. I'm very happy that all of you were able to participate. And I'm so glad to see Izzy. Izzy's one of my favorite humans. And I get to see the ones, my Milwaukee people, a lot, but we do miss you. But we are happy that you are where you are, because we know that there is a brilliant leader addressing the diaspora in DC. If there is only one, we know there is one, right? And it is a very good thing to see. You're muted, sis. You're muted.
We need more. Please come join me. I need company from Milwaukee, please.
Woo, tell somebody to hire me. We'll come out.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So I know Dr. Kowalik has a pretty tight timeline. She's done at 3. We are at 2:59. I am a respecter of time. I just want to thank each of you again for joining us. This will still be up on Facebook to share with the public. So when you get a chance, go back, check it, share it with your friends, because the information is what we wanted to make sure that was available to everyone.
Lashandra.
Yes, ma'am.
I would love to just remind people of a couple more events as we close out Brownsville Week, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am. Go for it. You have the floor.
All right, 4 o'clock here on the Brownsville Week Facebook page, we'll have Looks by Luna, makeup tutorial featuring artist Lola Vining. At 7 p.m., we'll from 7 p.m. tonight until 7 a.m. tomorrow, there'll be the Brownsville Sleepover for Education. We're accepting school supplies donations all week long, and there are collection spots at Pete's Market on King Drive in North, and at the 5th District Police Station on Val Phillips and Locust. Additionally, we have Brownsville Move the Crowd Quarantine Edition at 8 p.m. here on the Brownsville Week Facebook page, featuring the Dope Music Crew. Tomorrow, the last and final day of the 8th annual Brownsville Week, we'll have the Brownsville Ride at 10 a.m., meeting at Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. That's the old Reader's Choice on King Drive at 10 a.m. We also have the Well Mommy and Baby Care Package Drive up from 1 to 5 p.m. On 2nd and Garfield at Mount Zion. You have to be pre-registered for that first, and I'll put the details in the comments. And our last and final event for Brownsville 2020 is the Brownsville Drive-In Movie. It's a double feature. We have a 2 o'clock showing of The Wiz and a 7 o'clock showing of Barbershop. And that'll be on King Drive between Clark and Wright. You have to be pre-registered. You can get a ticket at parkinglottheater.com. I'll put that information in the comments as well. Tickets are still available for the movies, but please come and join us. And I want to say thank you to the sponsors of each of the events all week long who helped to make this possible. And I do want to take this moment with you, Izzy, and with you, Lashandra, on here just to say, I come up with great ideas all the time, but there's always a group of thought partners and people that I'm able to talk to and make that idea even better, to make it real. And so what people see, the end result of what people see was really a few friends talking about what was possible, but a whole lot of time, effort, and talent put in to make it a reality. And, you know, LaShondra, you and Izzy and a whole team of us, after that No Dollar Tree in Brownsville fight, it's what brought us to what we see now 8 years later. And even though the pandemic and everything that I know you, Commissioner Kowalik, are helping us battle through happened,
Yes.
it was nothing more important to us than to help make sure that the African American community here in Milwaukee has something to celebrate, uplift, and discuss. And Brownsville Week surely has been that, and will continue to be that in the future because of the strong foundation and the folks who helped to make it possible from the beginning and all those who helped along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for each of you. Dr. Koala, did you get your final thought?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, I'm just making sure you did. So we're gonna sign off now. We ask everybody to hit that census, do your census, get counted. The more people that we count, the better we can make sure that there is access to what people need.
Can I just say one more thing? I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. I'll say real quick. It's also important from a reparations standpoint that we participate. That is coming down the pike quite quickly in one form or another. And we don't have another shot for another 10 years. So the data that will be collected in 2020 will be very instrumental in any sorts of reparations foundation, whether that's a check or services or land or whatever. So because
for all of the above.
For all of the above and combination. Yeah, Dr. Kowalik talked about that just a little bit, but let's be counted and counted as Black folk.
Mm-hmm.
Very good ad, Izzy. And I think, you know, we all need to be thinking about that. That's the direction that we need to be headed. Like, what is the outcome for us to receive access to resources? Because my Blackness does not mind you being and identifying whatever you are. Just let my Blackness be and leave it alone.
So we'll have to do round 2, part 2 on that issue alone.
Sis, a whole nother talk. We will do more of these. Brownsville Week is where we place a lot of our energy, but Alderwoman Cogs and I have talked a lot about the need for a space for training, a need for a space for awareness, education, for learning from one another. And I think that that's an important thing that we need to do more of as culturally aligned communities. Blackness is not one homogenous experience, but the thing we have in common is we didn't have as much access to resources and information, but now we have way more. So I just want to hold space for that in the future as well. I will be asking you guys to do this again. One day, Dr. Kowalik is going to look at them numbers and it's going to say, y'all can go back outside. And when that day comes, we want to do these kinds of things in person or in DC on a lobby trip where we're telling people what we want them to do.
Get on a plane again.
Ma'am, I would like to leave, but I am not going nowhere.
Unless I'm driving.
All right, we could like key all day long, but we are actually on Facebook. So
are we? Oh.
So we're gonna be done for now. Shout out to Dr. Biko Baker and all of his support throughout Brownsville Week with the technology. He's not gonna say no words because he wants to be like the ghost in the shell. But we're grateful for Biko's brilliance also being here. He's an amazing Black man in our network.
Yeah.
And I just want you all to live radically and to rebelliously love yourself without anyone taking away the permission to say you're amazing. That is my closing thought.
Thank you, LaShondra.
Thank you.
Our illustrious moderator.
Thank you. I love y'all.
Mm-hmm.